Ever wondered what it's like to work on set of major broadcasting networks like PBS and King Studios? Perhaps you've dreamed of working as a media producer or digital photographer and need a few expert tips before getting started. If so, buckle up, because our featured guest for this Q&A style interview session is Stefan Fulton, founder of Full Coverage Media Group. Stefan is an experienced freelancer who works on set at PBS 39. He's worked on a number of documentaries and short films throughout his extensive career in media production. This includes an Emmy Award-winning documentary on human trafficking called Close to Home. Stefan is also a professional photographer and tech enthusiast. He is a regular contributor on YouAccel, where he's best known for his weekly Q&A sessions geared towards aspiring photographers, videographers, and freelancers. In his interview, Stefan opens up on just about every facet of his exciting journey as a media producer, starting from his early passion for photography and video production. He explores some of his main sources on inspiration and sheds light on various moments in history where photography had a profound impact on the world. With that said, let's dive into the session and hear Stefan's valuable insights.
So my name is Stefan Fulton, and I got started in digital photography a long time ago, back when I was in middle school, actually. I started taking a course at the Baum School of Art in Allentown for multimedia, earned a scholarship doing doodles and stuff on my math homework. A teacher kind of sent that in and submitted for me, and I ended up getting picked for a scholarship to Baum School. Basically, it was digital photography, Photoshop, sculpture, painting, drawing, all kinds of different things like that. And it was a really cool program that introduced me to a lot of different types of media production in general, especially the creative sides of those things. So it was very like art driven, turning those skills into being an artist, which was an experience that I'm very thankful for. Since then, I went into college. I was the only one that really knew how to use a digital camera. So when I started playing music in bands, they would always ask me to be the one to take the photo. Eventually, I ended up getting a digital camera. It was a Nikon D3000. I used that for a couple of years. I got some great lenses given to me. There was one year I had an older friend basically bought me a Nikon 10 to 24 millimeter lens, which was a very expensive, like $900 lens. And it just kind of ballooned from there. Like, people knew me as the photographer, so they'd always ask me to come take their photos, or, if there were friends who were going to submit to a contest to try and like win some clothing or something, they would hire me. And slowly it turned into something that people were actually willing to pay me for. And, one day I got so frustrated with the day job that I had that I quit, and I said that I wasn't coming back, and I had to kind of prove that I could do it. So that gave me a lot of inspiration and drive to go out and make photography work. So from that point forward, I was a full-time photographer, and I would do digital photography at live shows and concerts, and then do photo shoots with bands and all kinds of things like that. And it was a growing experience over time, and eventually I decided it was something that I had to go to school for. So I went to Algonquin College for photography techniques for about a year and a half. And then one of the instructors told me that I should actually just be out in the world working. So on his advice, I went out and did that and started doing real estate photography and portrait work with Alan Dean Photography. I was working with a bunch of real estate agents from around Ontario. Yeah, it just sort of built from there. Photography and videography wasn't always what I wanted to do. I think I was most passionate about playing music, but I had to create some sort of functional career that would go along with that, being in touring bands and whatnot, that would help make ends meet. So it was all photography at first, where I would take photos of bands as they played live shows, and then I ended up getting a Nikon D30-100, which I think was the first one to introduce really good high bitrate video in like right in the camera. So now I could use all those Nikon lenses that I had and get some really cool footage. So friends would start to ask me like, hey, we've done photos with you before. Would you like to do a music video? Do you have time to do that sort of thing? Or like, can we do a playthrough video where someone just plays through a song just kind of sitting there, and you make it look cool. So it sort of ballooned from there, but that was all practice for when I started to get into real estate, photography, and videography, doing both at the same time, and also doing live performances. Not only musicians now, but also like drama productions and musicals and stuff like that for Alan Dean Photography in Ontario. After moving out west, it definitely became clear to me that video was going to be my mainstay. Like, I really enjoyed the creativity that I could have when it came to producing and directing and editing video. And it was also becoming something that was much lower cost to actually do. Like the days of needing $10,000 to produce a music video were really over at that point. So I started doing a whole lot more production from the standpoint of, all right, I'm going to shoot the project, I'm going to direct everything, I'm going to write the script, I'm going to kind of do everything myself. And I realized that pretty quickly that without some training, I was going to have some trouble holding together everything. So unless I could get a team together, or unless I could get some sort of extra schooling, I wasn't really going to be able to continue doing that and make it work. So I decided to go to Full Sail University online for their Bachelor of Science Digital Cinematography degree, and I've never looked back since. They include in their package hardware package, so you get a Sony FS5 camera, a MacBook Pro, all this stuff. So now I finally had the power to edit video and also produce really high quality video. And you can kind of see that in my old brand, Stay Heavy Studios, as it progresses through time. They're on YouTube and Facebook and all that stuff. You can find all that media there. But you can kind of see how things improve over time, and eventually it became my full-time living. Now I'm down in the States, where I grew up, actually, working for PBS 39 in Bethlehem, and they've become, my major client. I do have other clients, but it's all freelance work. So it's really kind of my own business, and it's one of those things where I'm constantly having to find new gigs and constantly like working with old clients that I've had and adding on new ones and all that stuff. So it's an exciting career, and now it's something that I would never, I would never see myself doing anything else. Working with PBS and King Studios have been some amazing experiences. I've actually known the guys from King Studios since I was in high school. They were all in a band together, and I got to know them through members of their band that went to my high school. So I was also in bands at the time, and they kind of knew I was a bass player. So there were some times where we would talk to each other about, hey, like maybe one day we kind of do some stuff together. And I never thought that after college that would turn into us doing media production and producing videos and content for their YouTube channels and all kinds of things like this, working with the musicians that came through their doors, really having a wide variety of music to work with now, because I'm working with King Studios and because they're introducing me to their clients as well. It was a really great bottleneck when I moved back down to the United States, where or more so like a funnel where bands would come to the studio. I would already be doing content for the studio and helping them out with their website, their media presence, their marketing. Their clients would show up, and I would be there, working on a project for King Studios, and they would kind of look over and be like, "Hey, you do music videos, don't you? What would it cost to do X, Y, and Z?" And I would offer them a quote, and it would just sort of give me this captive audience of, hey, there's more clients that just walked in through the door that I might be able to get on my roster. So it was just a really cool environment where we all got to sort of help each other out with getting work and bringing in clients and doing things like that. And then PBS was very similar to that, but in very different aspects. So PBS is obviously much more public. It's much more kid-oriented broadcasts. They have PBS Kids. They have news. They have documentaries and things like that. So I got the opportunity to work with them via a project that was being produced for them close to home, which is a documentary on human trafficking. And it was a really difficult shoot. Like, I was the audio guy, so I was the one that was making sure that everyone's levels were correct. And we were doing these interviews with survivors of human trafficking. And it was a really difficult experience, but it really opened my eyes up to how media can sort of change the world around you and how it can affect things in a positive way. So that really gave me a lot of drive to work with more, I guess, more like serious forms of media. Not that music isn't serious, it's just that, this stuff felt important in a different way to me. Like, it wasn't something that I personally loved, but it was something that I felt like I was making a difference doing. So after that project, I ended up actually winning an Emmy with the entire group of people who produced that. And that helped me get into the doors at PBS Studios in Bethlehem. I've been working for them about 2 years now. We actually just restarted doing some stuff during quarantine in Pennsylvania is just ending. So we're finally able to go out and do some actual shoots with PBS. And we're gearing up for a season of media that's going to be produced at a distance, because it's all that environment. So it's a constantly changing environment. We're always working with different clients and with different sort of semi-famous people around the area, like big names in business or in arts and politics and things like that. So it's a really cool experience learning the way more professional end of media production, and then also being able to work with a group where you can really show your creativity. So those were two great learning experiences for me, and they continue to be to this day. I still work with King Studios. I was just actually talking with Justin, and I was emailing with Javier, who's the the head of production at PBS. So it's great to have a relationship with these people, and it's always fantastic to be working with them. They always have interesting gigs, and it's a really great way, like finding these funnels where there are going to be clients there. It's a really great way as a freelancer to fill out your roster. Absolutely. First one that comes to mind would be Philip Reardon, who is a photographer from Las Vegas, Nevada. He shoots a lot of work with models, they go on the cover of like Maxim and magazines like that. But the way that he composes photographs and the way that he goes out into the desert and will use like a high-powered battery strobe, he's just got some really, really cool production techniques. And the actual composition of the elements within his photographs, they make them feel like Venetian paintings, ancient, Renaissance art or something like that. Like there's a lot of thought that goes into how he places things, the way that he uses patterns and leading lines, and even the way that he uses RGB light, which I find is something that like not enough photographers are willing to experiment with, because it feels like you're changing your scene. It's less documenting than it is about creating then. But that's something that I've always really liked about him. He's always done more creation type stuff. Then there's also a photographer who really had a direct hand in changing my career path, which was Nick Godsell. He's a wedding photographer and videographer. He does travel media, and he also works with bands. And the way that I got to know him was one night I showed up at a concert. I was real young, just getting started in photo and video. And I showed up at a concert with a couple cameras and just kind of tried my luck to get in and photograph the event. And basically, I was talking to the bouncer and trying to convince them that I had totally spoken to the tour photographer and that I knew him and all this stuff, when the tour photographer actually walked up, and it happened to be Nick Godsell. And I remember he kind of looked at the bouncer, looked at me, and I was like, oh yeah, like I you remember speaking with me. I'm the local that has a bunch of cameras that wants to help you shoot some stuff. And I'm trying to sort of hint to him like, hey, I'd love to help in any way, and I think he saw that in my eyes, and he turned around to the bouncer. He's like, oh yeah, no, he's good. He's with me. And it completely blew my mind. Took me totally by surprise. And he brought me into the venue, got me backstage. We were in the green rooms with the bands. I got to know the members of Glass Cloud and Vela Maya through that. And it was a huge experience for me as a musician, first of all, just to get to meet these people that I had looked up to for so long, but also to have another photographer sort of like pay it forward in that way, where it's like maybe someone gave them an opportunity when they were younger. But, Nick Godsell, like he really gave me an opportunity there. That was the first ever music video that I shot, and the first live concert footage that I ended up shooting and actually putting it into a music video. And I think that some of those Glass Cloud videos are actually still up to this day. This would be at La Tulipe in Montreal. So I'd driven, a couple hours out to see there, and it was just by chance that Nick Godsell happened to be there to let me in. And I really got to learn a lot from him, because I stayed in contact with him after that shoot as well. and we would discuss about, hey, like, what equipment were you using when you were on stage? Like, your footage looks so cool. What is that? Things like that. He's been a great resource ever since that. Also, there's another photographer that I worked for in Ottawa. His name was Alan Dean, and I have to give him, props on the things that I've learned from him, because really he helped me a whole lot when it came to speaking with and guiding subjects for photography, for portraits, for headshots, and when it comes to modeling photography, which is something that I have a lot of passion for, that just because it's you get to experiment with posture, with the human shape and the human form. And there's a lot that you can do with that to be really creative, and there's no real expectation of like it has to be realistic. You could take a portrait of someone floating and people would be like, "Oh, that's really cool." They wouldn't expect it to be real. So it's a bit of a different realm that I got introduced to, and Alan Dean was one of those people that helped train me in that area. So these are a couple of photographers that I'm really thankful for and have had a major influence on me. I feel like I have a couple different types of like favorite types of photography, which sounds like a bit of a cop out, but hear me out on this. So my favorite type of photography to shoot, like actually just to produce, is definitely like modeling and fashion photography. Having someone in front of the lens that you can do anything. You can use RGB light, you can use weird lenses, you can put crystals in front of your lens and add some just really cool like effects that way. It's just like a realm where no one really expects reality. They expect the images to be striking. They expect, it to be sort of like an experiment with the human form and all that stuff. So you get a lot more leeway when it comes to that medium, in my opinion. And that's one of the reasons why I really love it. But at the same time, as a freelancer, I have a particular love for real estate, photography and videography, especially, just because it's one of the only mediums where you get to explore a house that you've never been to before, completely on your own half the time. There isn't someone that's really like guiding you around the place. Like, you get to kind of come over, check it out, adjust things, set up lighting, and really have like free range on this entire place, and spend a couple hours, produce some great content, and you can really tell a story without anything moving except for you, which is really cool. Like, you're documenting this huge place or these tiny places, just interesting places that are being passed from one person to another. So it's somewhere that's been someone's house. It's their place of safety and their place of just living life. So it's interesting to see that and how it will be passed on to someone else. It's also like a very lucrative field to be in. So you aren't in as much of a rush, and I feel like you can take your time and really make some amazing artwork that way. Even though it's, a lot of the time it goes up on a website, and once the listing is over, it's gone. It's not going to be used again. But I do like that style of photography. Modeling photography, real estate, I think those are my two kind of favorites. I do like doing photos with bands, but I feel like I've gotten in a bit of a rut with that lately. I feel like it's something that I could do some experimenting with and sort of change my style, and then I think I'll be much more happy with my my style of taking band shots, like especially the posed ones where everyone's there and you're trying to make them look natural in a scene. Working with a group is always difficult, but you can do some really creative stuff with that too. So I definitely want to work on that more. But I would say portraits with people, especially individuals, just one person. You're going out and taking photos either in the studio or on a cool location. It's just got a lot of room for creativity. It's definitely interesting working with models, especially when you're doing TFP shoots where you're meeting someone for the first time and you're going to do a photo shoot, maybe somewhere downtown or there's a cool park or something like that. But getting to know someone for the first time in a situation where it's like, hey, you're going to trust me to take your picture in, a variety of poses, and hopefully I won't get your bad side, or I'll make you look better than you thought that you ever thought you could. It's an interesting position to be in. So having that first time experience with someone where you go out and you kind of get to know each other, you get to talk and all this stuff, it can be a bit nerve-wracking. So it definitely, I can see it as a challenge, but I like getting to know new people. I feel like I'm a pretty gregarious person, but that was something that I definitely had to work on over time. Like I wasn't the kind of person who would go out to parties or go out and like just meet random people just for the heck of it. Pretty secluded and reclusive just in general. I'm much more of an introvert, but at the same time, it's a muscle that you exercise. So the more that you do it, the more you start to feel that confidence, and more you start to realize, okay, there's maybe 5 or 10 different ways that I really have to learn to talk to different models, because yeah, everyone's different, but most people will respond to like one of 5 different ways of posing. So, you can either do like hand motions, be like, hey, chin up, chin down, and really micromanage the shoot, or some people are just comfortable and, you just have to say the right things to either make them laugh or make them think about something a little bit heavy in their life, or, kind of guide their emotion. And then on top of that, there are people who, you might have to tell them a story. I find those really interesting photo shoots where it's 2 people in a room and one person is talking to the other person about an experience that they had, and they're trying to bridge that gap between 2 people that are relative strangers and make something that's as intimate and personal as a portrait. So I think it's definitely challenging, but the more that you do it and the more that you inject yourself into those photo shoots, you inject your own personality and your own style creatively into that, the more comfortable you'll become doing those photo shoots, and the more confidence you'll have directing, posing, and working with models. When it comes to main sources of inspiration, I would say it kind of goes per genre of photography. So for instance, if I'm trying to look for inspiration when it comes to modeling photography, my first place to go will be Instagram. There's an Instagram account that I have where I was posting modeling photos for a long time, and I ended up with something like 12,000 followers. So that's a really good place for me to go and find other people that do modeling photography. They're models themselves, or maybe it's just a page that shares photos of models in different ways. Whether they're male or female, it's just a good place for me to go where I can scroll through, and if something catches my eye, I'll stop and I'll kind of try and figure it out. Like, see what about that photo really caught my eye or made me pause like that. Because even if it's not necessarily a photo that I like, it's still something that caught my attention. And in this day and age, that's ever more important. As there's more and more photographers out there, the need to stand out really becomes a necessity, really. As photographers, we're constantly having to do things that are different, and that's one of my favorite ways to find inspiration on how to do that. Like I ended up getting a set of optic glass crystals so I could put them in front of my lens. There were a couple times where I've used CDs or mirrors on just the edge of my lens to sort of make a different effect, and all of those came straight from Instagram. Sort of inspiration in some way. Another good place for inspiration I can find is YouTube, because there's so many YouTubers out there that are trying to do weird things on their channel. Like, I'm trying to think of some good examples. Like, they use those smoke bombs that are different colors and things like that. There's people that have DIY tutorials on how to make things like this in your home, and there's just an endless trove of DIY photography hacks and stuff like that, and then things that you can try for different styles of creative photography. But when it comes to different mediums, I'll go to different places. So if I'm trying to get good inspiration for real estate photos, I'll actually look for real estate websites. So I'll go to Zillow or Trello, or not Trello, Trulia, or any of these places that have a whole bunch of real estate photos in one place. There I can look at local listings, see what other houses maybe even in the area of the house that I'm going to shoot, what they look like, what sort of style they use, if there's any past photos of the place that I'm actually going to take photos of. That's a great way to find inspiration and also sort of guidance in those different mediums. But when it comes to other things like bands and musicians, I try and look through classic big bands like in the genre that I was in. Bands like August Burns Red or Periphery were well known for having great media, and I think that's part of the reason why they became so popular. So I would try and sort of emulate that in certain ways. August Burns Red had this photo that I loved where they're sort of almost like standing in a wheat field, and it's this beautiful background, it's sunset behind them and everything like that. And it just didn't really fit that, we're all going to cross our arms and look angry sort of metal band style. And playing against type like that really became a part of what I was trying to do. Taking photos of bands where things look beautiful, as opposed to everyone looking like they're mad at whoever's taking the photo. So for different genres of photography, I would really find different places to find that inspiration. I remember, 500pixels.com and Fearless Photographers were some great places to find that inspiration, just in a general sense. But I started to kind of hone each genre into, okay, if I'm going to do a modeling shoot, I'm going to Instagram. Let's go check some stuff out. Once I was working in Ottawa as a photographer at a place called Mavericks, and there's a stage there that's about 3.5 feet tall. Like, it's a raised platform stage. And there was a band that had hired me to take photos there. And I had done everything that I could to communicate that with the person who was managing the venue at the time. And I knew that they didn't really have the greatest opinion of me. They thought that I was kind of pushy and would shove my way into things. Like, I would kind of show up at shows and try and get in and do photos for the bands, and just get pulled in with the bands themselves. So I think they had sort of a particular opinion of me because of that. And the one night I was working with that band, I hadn't heard back from the manager, and I just sort of expected, well, he knew me, so he's going to know that if I'm here taking photos, that I'm here with the band. But because I hadn't expressly said that to him, he decided that it was a good idea during the set, while I'm taking photos and I'm crouched on the edge of the stage, to grab my backpack and pull me backwards off the stage. And I it was one of those situations where I was having to weigh, how much I like shooting at this venue, which was quite a bit, versus how angry I was at this person for yanking me off of the stage onto my bag of equipment with my camera in my hand when I was paid to be here. Like, I was actually supposed to be in that place, and it was just, he hadn't checked his emails. So I'm not sure if he didn't recognize me or something like that, but it was a really odd situation. It was one of the first times where I ever thought that I was going to get into a physical altercation while on a gig. But yeah, I remained calm. They said some choice words, and I tried to just sort of, play the high road, I guess. And it turned out that we ended up discussing the thing. He apologized. He started actually sending me emails about shows and being like, hey, this band is coming to town. Would you like to get in touch with them? So it actually made for a better relationship between the two of us overall, but it was definitely a harrowing ordeal at the time. The other situation that comes to mind, I was working for a company on the West Coast. This is out in British Columbia. At the time, we had gone across the border into Seattle for this company, Marathon Photo. And they're a fantastic company. They employ a lot of photographers. They'll pay you to do marathon photography. So you're taking a lot of photos in a day, but they pay a pretty darn good rate. They'll pay for your travel expenses, your room if you have to stay over somewhere, and they provide all the equipment as well. So it means there's no wear and tear on your equipment. I think they were using Nikon D3s when I worked with them. And basically, I remember one day, the person that I was partnered with, who was local to Seattle, hadn't shown up at the pre-meeting. So they hadn't gotten the information on who they were with or what time they had to be where. And, the person facilitating the meeting was like, oh yeah, this person does this every now and then. I'll just send them a message. It'll be fine. So I was like, okay, you know what? I've worked with the facilitator before, so I'll trust them. But I'd never worked with this person before. And, it got to the end of the meeting and he still hadn't shown up. So they said, hey, just, grab his equipment and just meet him down in the lobby at 5 o'clock in the morning, because these marathons, they start at around 7 a.m. So we have to be out and on location at around 6. You have to be there early. So that means that we're leaving the hotel at 5 o'clock sometimes. And this guy was going to be my ride about 20 blocks. I didn't know that at the time, but it was about 20 blocks throughout Seattle to get to the point in the marathon we were supposed to take photos. So this person doesn't show up. And Eventually I get frustrated because that means, I'm not going to get paid if I don't have photos to deliver. So I go, all right, I walk inside, talk to the concierge, get a map to where I'm going, and ask them to just draw me a line on it where I need to go. Because I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have any ability to get in touch with people. So basically, I grabbed that equipment. It's 2 big backpacks, about $10,000 worth of camera equipment in each of them. And then another big camera in both of my hands, both on monopods. And I just start booking it. I'm just walking as fast as I can. And I start realizing, wow, it's taking me a long time to reach this first turn on the map. And I'm going and I'm going, and it starts to get into some of the rougher areas in Seattle. I'm seeing tents around. I'm seeing a whole lot of, it looks like a homeless area. And I'm not the kind of person who's normally, I don't feel very afraid in public situations. Like I have sort of a look to me that might be a little more standoffish to most people. But there was a group of gentlemen that decided to approach me, and it just didn't feel good. But I was on a mission, so I literally just walked straight through the group, was just like, I don't have time for this, and I was really like, had that mean mug look on my face. I thought for the life of me that I was going to get all that equipment stolen from me, probably get my butt kicked, or even worse. But, nothing actually ended up happening. I walked as far as I could before realizing that it would have taken me about 5 hours to make the entire trip. And luckily, one of the other facilitators just happened to drive out that direction. They heard from the concierge that I was going to do it on foot, and they're like, no, that's like 20 blocks. He's not going to make that. So they drove down, they picked me up, and they got me to a different location where I could actually get the shots that I needed. And I ended up taking about 24,000 photos that day. So it was just altogether a nerve-wracking day in general. Like once I got on location, it was just like, oh, here they come. All right, camera up and photos for the next 5 hours. But it was working with Marathon Photo was an incredible experience, and I would love to do it again. Like they've got some cool gigs out there, but it takes some time. If you have free weekends, that can be a good gig to get. 2 come to mind. One was a photo that I took. It was a modeling shoot that I did with a friend out in Ottawa. Basically, we found an ice rink. She's wearing high heels and a hockey jersey and doing her best to make it look kind of sexy while she's leaned up against this ice rink, but she's literally standing on ice in stiletto high heels. And, I'm kind of skittering around on the ice myself, trying to get these good shots of her. We thought that it was the funniest thing when we were taking the photos. It was just, we were laughing all day long, and it was a really, really fun photo shoot because of that. But it actually ended up being an award-winning photo for this contest. She won first place, and she ended up getting, it was something like $3,000 in prize money and professional photo shoot with this world-class photographer. It was really, really cool, and I think she's actually still doing modeling to this day. So a little part of me feels like I helped start a model's career in that fashion, and a little part of me is just proud that photo got the recognition that it did. The other image is actually a live music shot that I took, and it was of the band Glass Cloud, and in particular of their vocalist Jerry Rausch. He was doing this, big epic scream at the front of the stage, and he's holding his hat up and he's yelling into the microphone and all this stuff, and there's tons of people out in the audience that are just yelling right back to him. Like you can see the exuberance in the room and the raw energy and all that stuff. And that photo I posted on Instagram. I sent it to the band. I posted it on Facebook. They posted the images as well, and that one in particular actually got picked by the magazine Alternative Press and was printed in their magazine. I don't think I was credited at all because I didn't watermark my images or do anything like that. I wasn't really looking for recognition, but Jerry actually sent me the article and was like, hey dude, thanks for taking that photo. I'm in the top 15 metal vocalists of the 2000s. And it was just a really, really cool, not only article to see a musician that I really loved in a cool list like that, and pretty high on the list too. But also to just have an image used in that way, even if it wasn't something that I was aware of, it was just okay, this is cool. This is a magazine that I've always paid attention to and has been a big inspiration for me. So I was very proud to have that image featured, but I feel like no one knows it. So it's kind of cool. Sometimes those things happen, and you have to weigh, hey, do I try and like get recognition for that, or do I just let it be? Because, maybe if I had asked for credit, they would have gone, all right, we're just going to get another one of the hundreds of thousands of images of Jerry Roush that we can find online. I think it was partially lottery, but also partially that was just a really cool photo. I have worked with film photography. It's been a long time since I've used it. Since digital cameras came out and since they became a part of my workflow, really I've switched to digital primarily. But I have owned film SLRs before. I've used them before back when I was at the Baum School of Art when I was maybe 12, 13, and 14 years old. I used to take a course there that was film photography and darkroom. One of the coolest things that I think that we did in that class was sun exposures. So there was this thing that you could use called exposure paper, which was a lot like the negative of film, but basically it was low sensitivity. So you would place objects on top of the sheet of paper, and then you would take the sheet of paper outside, and everything except for the shadowed spots would be exposed. So you could do these really cool things that were a lot like film photography, and then you could sort of translate those same techniques into actual film photography. But that darkroom class was really, really interesting because I was simultaneously taking a course at Baum School on Photoshop, and I didn't realize it at the time, but the tools in Photoshop, like the dodge tool, the burn tool, and all that stuff, the icons are what the tools themselves actually look like in a darkroom. So that's why they use those, kind of odd looking sorts of icons for these photo tools in Photoshop. But that's exactly what they were used for back in the day. And getting to learn how to use a light meter and how to read settings and set your exposure properly without being able to go click and then look at it right away and do that immediate live review. It was a great learning experience, and I think it was a huge factor in what drove me to want to use my cameras manually and also learn how to use cameras in a setting where it's like I feel like I could basically pick up any camera and take a good photo. It's knowing those settings, knowing how to use aperture, ISO, and shutter speed to control your exposure that really will carry you through on any camera out there. Photography is absolutely an art form. There's obviously people who carry it to a higher medium. There are people who kind of do it as like a throwaway thing or just to document stuff, but that doesn't make it any less of an art form. When you look through these books of like Pulitzer Prize winning photographs, a lot of those are documentary photographs of, specific events or major things that happened in history or important people even in the history of the world. But you can tell within those images too that there's also like a trained eye. Sometimes there's the shock of a photographer in the images. Like there are some really heavy photographs in there, and yet it's still, you're looking through the eye of someone else. So it's absolutely an art in that it's someone else's interpretation of the world around them that you're getting to view through their perspective. But there are obviously people that take the medium even higher, like portrait photographers like Annie Leibovitz, people who are doing photo composites and really bringing it to a new art form, or just being really, really creative with their photographs. Like a lot of the photographers who shoot for Vogue, they do some amazing work, and a lot of that work is done in camera. It's like there's some incredible stuff that people are doing with photographs out there it's constant inspiration. And I feel like the style of photography that I was getting into when I was shooting bands live was a lot like that. I would do long exposure with a pretty wide angle lens, so I would have it sort of focused to about 3 to 5 feet in front of me. I would shoot at about f8, so I would have a longer area that's within the depth of field of the camera, so it would be in focus. You'd have a lot in focus in the actual shot. But then I would also pair that with an off-camera flash. It was a Nikon R1C1 macro flash kit, which is a little remote commander and then 2 little units that sit on a ring. So I would take that ring and I would hold it out to the side, so kind of like above and to the side of someone, and use that to get really directional flash during these concerts. And I couldn't do it too much because it was just really obnoxious, but I would go up and kind of just pow, 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 like take a couple shots. But I would take the photo, I would have about 1/3 of a second exposure, or like even lower than that, even up to like 1 second exposure, where I would take the image and then I'd spin the camera as much as possible. So the flash would be at the front, and that would freeze the entire image. So you'd have the person frozen playing guitar or screaming into a microphone or doing whatever, drumming, playing bass. And the long exposure would make all of the lights in the background, so like all those colored lights and the little shiny parts of the guitars and whatnot, it would make those blur into a long exposure image, which would give you these really cool trails. And that, I have never felt more like an artist than when I was producing images like that. It's really cool when you get to hone a skill and you start applying it to really specific situations. And this was stuff that I was not getting paid for. A lot of the time I was just showing up at these shows. I would have my camera with me and I would do my best to get cool images for people, and hopefully that would get me in the door to do like a music video or something like that for the band afterwards. So absolutely, it's an art form, and there's different ways that everyone can find, art within it, and a form of art that also speaks to them. I know some people, there's I'm trying to think of the name of the page, but they do action figures in these really awesome poses, and they'll typically like take the shots and then composite in explosions and dirt and dust and debris, and they make these action figures really come to life, and it's completely a passion project on their part. So it's really inspiring to see people going out and doing these things that they love and making their photography into a form of art. Oh man, this is a really, really great question. So we had just sort of talked about, in one of the other questions, Pulitzer Prize winning photographs and how a lot of those are like documentary photographs. So I think that the point in time where that really changed and documenting photographs really started to change the world was around the time of the Civil War. I always remember that there's this book that my dad had, which was, I think it was called Pictures of the Civil War. And it was this big book, super thick, that was basically a picture book, but it was like a history picture book. So I could actually go through it and see. And the images that came out of the Civil War some of them were inspiring, some of them were terrifying, some of them were sad. Like there's images of the aftermath of battles where there's horses, the bodies of horses lying, all bloated in these fields and stuff like that. And I think it really did a lot to show like the horror of the Civil War to everyone in the nation. Like everyone sort of experienced it in their own way, but seeing like the aftermath of how many bodies there were at Johannesburg and how many bodies there were at like Gettysburg and Antietam and these huge battles where masses of human life were laid down. And these were often people that were like next door neighbors, or they lived just across state lines from each other, or they were even relatives who were just living in different parts of the country. So it really threw the horror of that war into everyone's face and made it impossible to really forget and ignore. So I think around the time of the Civil War, the 1860s and whatnot, when photography it was much more mobile at that point. You could go out into a battlefield and take images and whatnot. World War I and World War II were very similar, where there were photographers out in the field getting footage of battles and all this stuff. It was just wild. It was really like an incredible time for photography to have a massive impact on the world around it.